Let's talk about setting age-appropriate expectations for behavioral and spiritual growth. I think it's a really important class because it's so misunderstood, I think, by a lot of people. And I think a lot of people expect more from their kids than their maturity or neurological maturity is able to allow them. So, um, mainly this is going to be relevant for parents who have kids between infancy and like fifth grade. Now, that's a span, if you think about it, of only about 10 years, but it's a little like comparing a 20-year-old to a 60-year-old because so much development happens during that short period of time. So before we can talk about what's important from the standpoint of parenting, I want to do a little class on development and what happens to a child intellectually and emotionally and socially during this period. Yeah, and if you look at my little toddler's graphic, toddler's brain, I think the Elmo part is starting to shrink over time. I don't know, but I love the Muppet appreciation lobe. I've got one of those that has never gone away. Um, Now I'm by trade a neuropsychologist, so I love talking about the development of the brain. Mary's going to nudge me if I go into too much detail. This here is the brain of a 12-week-old fetus. Now, I don't know what you learned when you were growing up, but this outer part, if you can see my cursor, is the cerebral cortex. That's the outer layer of the brain. So the brain is kind of like a walnut. And it's got, in fact, some of our brains are more like a walnut than other people's brains. But we've got two hemispheres, as you know. And this outer part, this white part you're looking at, is the cortex, which does all the things that make us human: thinking, reasoning, processing emotions, planning, being organized. It all happens out here. Now, if you look here, you've got some folds. These are called sulci, these valleys. And you're used to seeing a brain that's full of sulci, that's all wrinkly, right? And you're used to seeing a brain that's darker in color. In 12 weeks, we've got a couple of folds already. We've got the longitudinal fissure, that's called, the Sylvian fissure, and the Rolandic fissure. So these are some major wrinkles that everyone has, and they're major landmarks. And but that's about it. Otherwise, at 12 weeks, you're kind of a cue ball. This is 25 weeks. So by my calculation, that's 13 weeks later, right? Did I get that math right? Okay, so in just 13 weeks, let me see if I can go back. Look at the difference in development between that 12-week-old brain and that 25-week-old brain. Many more gyri, which are the hills, and sulci, which are the valleys. Look at how much development happened in that short period of time. That tells you how important prenatal care is. This baby hadn't even been born yet. And look at how much development has happened in such a short period of time. So this is why I forced my wife, when we had children, to drink, 15 gallons of milk a day to make sure that the brain was myelinating appropriately. And, prenatal care, very important. Stay off drugs. Don't do anything bad while you're pregnant. This is the goal. So this is a healthy adult brain. Except it's not actually in the guy, so it's not that healthy. This is a freshly taken out of a head brain. Now, people often ask, how did we get this slide? When we were in private practice, if you didn't pay your bill, we came gunning for it. This is something we might take away. And Tony, I keep getting requests to admit people to the room. So if you can reclaim hosthood or whatever you do.
Yeah, I've been admitting them.
So the whole point is this: look at how much development happens between, well, now I can't go backwards, happens between 12 weeks, 25 weeks, and then adulthood. This is a graphic representation of what I just told you. And if you look along the x-axis, this is age in years, and the y-axis is a percentage of ultimate adult brain weight. If you look from 0 to about 6 is when most brain development occurs, 0 to 6. This is the time you want to do something. Incidentally, this is an aside. If you have a child who you suspect might have a learning disability or a learning issue, this is the time you want to find out and do something about it while the brain is growing and recircuiting. So much happens in that short period of time. Now, what happens? So what happens in this last 5% from age 5, 6, 7 to adulthood? What's left to develop? If you take out an adult brain, you will find that it has two colors, that the front part of the brain is blue and the back part is pink. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. This is a graphic representation of the frontal lobe. This part of the brain, which is in the front, hence the name, is the part of the brain. As humans, we have bigger frontal lobes by proportion than any mammal on the planet. Therefore, you know that this frontal lobe has a lot to do with what makes us human. It's the seat of planning, organization, emotional control, self-control. You have neurons or nerve cells in the very, very front part of the frontal lobe that help you control your own behavior. They're called inhibitory neurons. The point is this part of the brain that helps you control yourself and control your own behavior and modulate your emotions doesn't develop. It's the last part of the brain that develops. And if you look at this graph, it doesn't even kick in fully until the late teens or early 20s. The frontal lobe isn't done developing until someone's about 23 years old. The point is this: our kids don't have self-controlled gears. The machinery isn't even in place until they're 20, 21, 22 years old. Yet we expect them to be perfectly self-controlled and be able to inhibit their own feelings and plan and organize things. So all I'm saying is, I hope this demonstration shows you that sometimes we're expecting more of our kids than they're neurologically capable of giving. Now, what happens during this time cognitively? In the 1930s, there was this dude named Jean Piaget, and he was a psychologist who, like my wife and I, experimented on his own child to learn things about cognitive development in kids. This was in the 1930s. You see, he did this breakthrough work, and he examined the cognitive development of kids. And he figured out that development happens in stages. You don't have a kid who one day wakes up and is like, oh, I totally understand all ethics and I'm totally brilliant and moral. And, all this stuff happens slowly by stages. The first thing he figured out is that over time, kids go from being egocentric. Egocentrism is when you think you're the center of the universe. Now, some of you with adult age kids are thinking, oh, well, wait a minute, my kid's still that way. Yes. This process takes time to go from egocentrism to sociocentrism, which is finally being convinced that, oh, I'm not the center of the universe. There are other people in the universe. That transition takes time. So some of you wives, I can see it on your faces, you're thinking that even your husband has not made it there yet. But what happens to a child cognitively during this time when they're going from egocentrism to sociocentrism? You go through these stages, Piaget theorized. If you took a Psych 101 class, forgive me for repeating this, but you need to know it anyway now that you're a parent. From birth to age 2, you go through the sensory motor stage. That's when that brain looks like a little cue ball. Kids are born, infants know nothing. They know nothing. All they've got to communicate with the world and to understand the world is neurological reflexes. So they learn when they're hungry, for example, their neurological reflex is to cry. They don't will it. They don't say, hey, I need to cry. It's a natural reflex. Then someone sticks something in their mouth that tastes good and is edible. So over time, this infant says, now, wait a minute, let me get this straight. So every time I cry, someone's going to stick something in my mouth to eat. This is awesome. That's how they learn. They begin to learn connections, how they begin to learn about the world. If they touch the cat, the pet cat, and the cat bites them, their reflexes cause pain, and they say, oh, wait a minute, let me get this straight. stay away from this dangerous animal, and that's called pain, and I'll hate cats the rest of my life. So this is how kids learn from birth to age 2. It's all by reflexes. Then from age 2 to age 7, they go through the pre-operational stage. Now this, when kids are in this stage because they develop symbolic play. This is when you see them using a shoebox as a car, or they pretend to be a pirate or a superhero or something like that. They're starting to be a little imaginative, and they're starting to extrapolate from experience. But from age 2 to 7, they still don't understand logic. They still can't, they're neurologically incapable of seeing things from the standpoint of somebody else. So this is why it surprises me when parents expect their 2-year-old to 7-year-old to understand these big philosophical issues, like why it's not good to be mean to other kids. And we get calls all the time from parents who are convinced their 7-year-old is a budding sociopath because they don't feel sorry if they've hurt their little brother or sister. And they literally call and say, my kid shows no remorse when he hurts his little sister. He's going to be a psychopath, isn't he, Dr. Shapiro? No, don't worry about it. He's cognitively unable to put himself into the shoes of others right now. You teach them that by teaching them rewards and consequences. It's kind of an extension of the reflexive learning I was just talking about. Don't lecture them on humanity. Don't lecture them on the moral value of appreciating someone's humanity. They're not going to understand it. You tell them every time you hit your little brother, I'm going to put you in timeout, or I'm going to take away your tablet. That's how they learn. So don't have these moral, philosophical arguments. They'll do plenty of that to you when they're 20. The next stage from age 7 to 11 is called the concrete operational stage. Only now in that period of time are kids starting to think logically, and they can start to extrapolate from their experiences, and they can predict the consequences of their behavior, but neurologically not until then. So once again, parents will look at their 5-year-old and think, didn't you think before you stuck a fork in that outlet? Or didn't you think before you ate that bug off the... No, they can't think logically yet. They can't predict consequences from experience. That doesn't happen until they're 7 to 11-year-olds. The last stage, according to Piaget, is the formal operational stage. Now that's from teenager to who knows. It's when people start thinking abstractly and they can contemplate the big issues like spirituality and the meaning of God and how God is going to take a position in their life and what's their place in the universe. That doesn't happen until teenagerhood and maybe never. This, if you don't mind me saying, is why I'm always suspicious of families who baptize their kids early, who are like, I can't wait to get them baptized. I get it. You want to get them in the safety zone before something bad happens. So I'm going to baptize my kid when they're 12. They're going to start studying the Bible when they're 11 weeks old. And, but look, if you don't reach formal operations until the beginning of adolescence, let's give them a little time to figure all this stuff out and piece it together. They're not neurologically capable of seeing that far ahead, just in my humble opinion. So that's how kids develop neurologically and cognitively during that time. Let me have Mary tell you what kids need emotionally during this time.
These are the years when we establish that very important love bond with our kids that we were talking about earlier. And all of your training and discipline is taking place in the context of your relationship, your emotional relationship with your child. And I've met very few parents in my 40 years of working with families that would say that they don't love their kids. Most parents say, no, I love my kids dearly. But sometimes we're very poor at communicating to our kids that we love them unconditionally. If we're not good at it a lot of times, we want our kids to know, I love you on your good days and I love you on your bad days. Now, there may be some consequences on your bad days, but I love you anyway. I think if we communicate to our kids, I only love you when you're following the rules, or I only love you when you're doing what I ask you to do. Our kids eventually are either going to become rebellious or they're going to become anxious and depressed. So our kids need to know, I love you, period. I love you no matter what. Ephesians 6 talks about to fathers, it says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. But I think, both fathers and mothers, that's how we exasperate our kids, is when we make them feel like, I only love you when you're doing what I want you to do. Otherwise I don't love you. There's a few simple things that we don't think about very often, but that are super important in communicating this kind of unconditional love to our kids. One is our tone of voice when we talk to our kids. We need to be able to talk to our kids in a way that they feel loved and respected. And it's funny, if you think about it, if we, when the world is right on its axis, which it hasn't been for a while, but if we talk to somebody in fellowship at church, think about the tone of voice that you use when you're talking to a brother or sister at church. Is that the same tone of voice you use with your kids at home? We need to watch that we're communicating, I love you, to our kids when we talk to them. Things like sarcasm, which it was the favorite sin in the Shapiro household. This one is sarcastic. Our kids are all sarcastic, and we have to constantly apologize to each other for what we call crossing the line. I was trying to make a joke and tried to do something funny, and I did something that hurt somebody's feelings. So sarcasm can be very harmful. Demeaning talk, name calling, being angry a lot, or just being annoyed and irritable a lot can make our kids feel very unloved. Like I told you, we had these kids, kind of stair-step kids, one after the other. And when our kids were little, our oldest daughter was very demanding. She constantly wanted my attention, and you had to just constantly be dealing with her and talking with her, and she would just wear me out, honestly. And one of the blessings we had in our home that we raised our kids in is we had a basement apartment, and we had several sisters from church that lived with us over the years. And one time, one of the sisters that lived with us came upstairs and said, I need to talk to you because I've noticed something. When you talk to the two little ones, you're very gentle and very sweet in the way that you talk to them. But when you talk to Amanda, you always sound upset with her. And the reason I always sounded upset with her is because I always was upset with her, and so I knew it was true. So I had to start praying every morning. God, please help me be sweet to this girl. All right. Please help me to be gentle and sweet with her. And I worked at it. And at first it almost felt insincere to me, because on the inside, I'm going to kill her. And on the outside, I'm going, honey, but I worked at my tone of voice being sweet to her. And she and I are best friends right now. We're best friends, and I don't think we would have that relationship if I hadn't corrected that early on, if somebody hadn't corrected me early on about that. So try to listen to your tone of voice with your kids. Ephesians 4, verse 29, it says, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ God forgave you. Again, that scripture should be on our refrigerators, that's the way we need to be treating each other in our homes. The second thing I want to talk to you about today is eye contact. We seldom think about making direct eye contact with our kids. Again, if I'm talking with a friend, or I'm having dinner with somebody, or I'm going to sit down across from them and make sure that I'm making eye contact with them. But what happens in our homes is we get super busy. we're doing the dishes and we're taking phone calls and we're on the computer and we kind of talk over our shoulder at our kids, but very rarely do we talk one-on-one and make eye contact with our kids. And eye contact is very important in filling up our kids' little emotional tanks. Very important. The research indicates that parental eye contact is important in teaching children how to empathize with others. It's important in teaching them how to tune into another person and understand their intentions and to predict what somebody is likely to do next. One researcher by the name of Siegel, who founded a field called interpersonal neurobiology, has proved that deprivation of a mother's gaze negatively affects the area of the brain that coordinates social communication, empathy, emotional regulation, and the establishment of value and meaning. So eye contact is super important, is what I'm saying. And we have to kind of be aware of that and to make sure, a lot of times what we do, right, is when our kids are in trouble, we go, look at me, right? So when they're in trouble and we're trying to correct them, we make eye contact, but we may not make eye contact when we're telling them how much we love them or how proud we are of them. So sometimes you need to put down the phone, put down the dishes, put down whatever you're doing and make sure you're making eye contact with your child to make them feel loved. The third one is physical affection. And I think we do, where'd the baby go? There was a baby here a minute ago. I don't see it anymore on this Zoom. But we do pretty good when they're mad, right? We hold them and we rock them and we kiss them and we tickle them. And, when they're cute little babies, we do pretty good with the physical affection stuff. But if you have a 9-year-old boy in your house, all right, that doesn't smell that good anymore, and he may not be as cute as he used to be when he was a toddler. And, sometimes we forget that they need it too. That those big kids need physical affection too. They need a hug. They need a pat on the back. You may have to run him down to do it. And God forbid, moms, you should do it when any of his friends are around. Do it privately, but they still need physical contact. They need those hugs and that affection, that physical affection. The deal with physical affection is if your kids are not getting it at home, when they become teenagers and the hormones are going, they're going to find it elsewhere. So if you're not grabbing your 13-year-old and hugging them, they're going to find somebody else that will hug them. So we need to fill them up at home with that physical affection. The last one, and we've already talked about it, is the one-to-one time. You've got to spend some time getting to know that little person in your house as a person, as an individual, and kind of drawing out what are you thinking, what do you like, what do you not like, how are you feeling. That takes some time and effort.
All right, now let me talk to the dads. Dads, are you listening? All dads, attention all dads. Before we turn all these communication duties over to the moms, let me offer a few notes for the dads. I want you to think about how dads communicate, how you personally communicate. In my experience, I've noticed in working with parents in the office that what comes out of men's mouth to their kids usually takes one of three forms. It's either an interrogation, a command, or anger. If you think about interrogation, that's when you say, you come home and you're all stressed out and you're done with the day of work and you say, why did you do that? Let me just tell you, the world's most useless question on the planet when it comes to children is why. You will never get a straight answer. You might, if you're lucky, get the, I don't know. That's the most common answer to the question why. So why is you should reserve that one. So I used to do that when I was a stressed out dad of little kids come home, and I was super sensitive to everything that had gone wrong. And why did you do that? Or what happened here? An interrogation. The command, if you think about it, dads, put this away. Be quiet. Go outside and play. Commands are fine. God gave out lots of commands, but if you think about it, why am I giving this command? Is it just to make my life easier? If this command is just to make your life easier, for it to be quieter, or to get something picked up that I don't want to get out of my easy chair to pick up, or that I want to see something made right that was made wrong, then it's not an appropriate command. Does that make sense? I want you to see the difference. So most commands that come out of dad's mouth serve the sole purpose of making your life easier, not teaching or training, which is what a command should be for. And the last one, anger, which is we call anger the umbrella emotion of men. Most men, if you trace back your feelings and you follow the breadcrumbs back or a behavior and action, it usually goes to anger. Men aren't in touch with a lot of their other emotions often. And any, insecurity, worries about the future, all of that stuff tends to get turned into anger with most men. I don't want to overgeneralize. Now, when a father in particular communicates angrily to a child, there's one of only a few things that can happen. Either a child, when confronted with anger, they're either gonna escalate, so you get angry, they get angry, you get angrier, they get angrier, and it'll escalate sometimes to the point of aggression or sometimes to the point of destruction. So when confronted with anger, kids will either escalate or they'll do the opposite. They'll shut down. I tell people, especially parents of teenagers, your kid has in his or her head a valve. And when that valve gets flooded with anger, that valve shuts off and you can see it in the kid's face. That's when they get that glazed look. I'm going to endure this. I'm getting yelled at right now. I'm going to endure this. And I'm going to keep my mouth shut until it passes by like a wave. None of these three are particularly productive. And someone, Damien, put fight or flight. Absolutely. Fight, flight, or fright. So true. So dads, this is what I want you to do. I'm going to challenge you to do this. Make a 3x5 card with these three things on it: interrogation, command, or anger. Then I want you to monitor your communications with your kid. I wish you could carry around a recorder for a while. Monitor your communications with your kids for some time and really take a cold, hard look at how many of your communications with your kids fall into one of these three things. Do that for a few days. Just listen to yourself for a few days. Or even better, since some of your wives are standing right next to you, nodding their heads, ask your wife to point it out to you. When our kids were little, I found that the way I handle stress is I would micromanage my kids. So I'd come home and I'd be all stretched out. Why is there crumbs on the floor? And why is there toothpaste behind the sink? Mary would say, well, it's because they're 3 years old. That's why. So when I came to convictions about that's how I handle stress, I become picky and I micromanage. I said, Mary, every time I do that, we're going to come up with a sign. Do this. Every time I see you do this, I promise I'm going to stop. No questions asked. So even better, dads, if you look at these three things and you have convictions about this, get your wife to tell you every time you're doing it. And the rule is you cannot refute it. You can't contradict it or say, no, I wasn't doing that. You have to listen to it. We now have an arrangement. My wife tends to think I drive unsafely at times. So I now have a similar arrangement that she is allowed to call me on my driving and I can't say anything. If she thinks I'm driving too fast or being too aggressive, she points it out to me and I've got to bite my tongue until the blood runs down the back of my throat. So do the same thing with your communication, dads.
We need to have a console real quick. We're going to be able to get through this next.
Excuse us for one second.
We can get through the parental styles, but we will never get through this.
Okay, we might break that up. All right.
So can we finish that in the afternoon?
Yeah. Cool.
Sorry, we're doing time management here, kind of. We need to talk about, before we talk about specific discipline approaches, we need to talk about what in the research is called parental styles. And again, and you guys are going to get sick of hearing me use the word relationship today. but any kind of discipline approach is set in the context of the relationship between the parent and the child. So it's only effective and beneficial if it's in the right kind of relationship with the parent. So that's what we're talking about in this section. And let me kind of take you through. Michael? Sorry, I need my tech guy. The psychological research talks about 4 different parental styles. The first is what is called an uninvolved parent. And these are parents who are not warm towards their children, and they don't place any demands or expectations on them. You know, hopefully no Christian parent would ever fall into that group. But let me tell you, a lot of parents in the world do. Okay, they get overwhelmed with life. They have addiction problems, whatever, you know. And so they're not warm towards their children, and they don't place any expectations or limits on their kids. The second parental style is what is called the permissive parent. And permissive parents are very warm towards their children, but they're very indulgent and passive. You know, they believe that they demonstrate their love to their kids by giving in to whatever the kid wants. And there's a lot of parents these days that are falling into this group, you know, that I let my kid do whatever they want to do because I want them to like me. I want to be their friend. The third parental style is what is called the authoritarian parent. And these are highly controlling parents who display little warmth and love towards their children. They're strict disciplinarians, and they use a punitive and restrictive style of parenting. So this is the parent that says, you're going to do what I say no matter what. And I don't want to hear how you feel. And I don't want to hear what you think. You know, you're going to follow my rules. I'm in charge here, period. You know, I don't care. I don't care how you feel about it. The fourth style is what is called the authoritative parent. And authoritative parents are warm but firm. They encourage their children and adolescents to be appropriately independent while maintaining limits and controls on their actions. You know, as the child becomes older in these homes, they might engage the child in a conversation about, what do you think your curfew should be, to a 16-year-old? But the child knows we'll talk about it. I will listen to what you have to say, but in the end, mom and dad are going to make the decision about what's best for you. Developmental psychologists overwhelmingly endorse the authoritative style of parenting, especially for preteens and teenagers. Authoritative parenting is associated with a positive relationship between the parent and the teen, and appropriate self-reliance and autonomy in teenagers. They also found that authoritative parents are more flexible in the way that they set limits and boundaries for their kids. For instance, if you have a teenager, you may let your teenager spend more time with peers that you think are positive influences for them, but you're a little more restrictive with peers that you don't feel great about, that you feel like it's a negative influence on your child. So you're able to be more flexible like that. Okay.
Tony, at this point, we're about halfway through this class. Do you want to break now, which was our planned break time?